But most importantly, there is nothing to suggest that legal systems and police forces need to be monopolistic or state-run. Now, I understand a monopoly to mean a grant of privilege through coercive means restricting competition. Monopolies are decried as harmful in every other aspect of society, but somehow when it is suggested that perhaps a monopoly is not the best way to run a legal system, people cannot wait to throw up their arms and exclaim anarchy, which I guess is what I'm doing, and storm off from the conversation. At the very least, no one will take you seriously. The fact that you are all here listening politely, maybe even considering some of my arguments, lends me hope that maybe this position isn't nearly as crazy as it sounds. To illustrate the badness of monopoly, let me borrow from Long and say that my gang and me are going into the shoe selling business. Not only are we going into the business, but we're also saying, I photoshopped that. But we're also saying that no one else gets to. The first objection to be lodged is, what makes us so special? Aren't we just regular people? Where do I get off claiming that I'm allowed to do something that you're not? Well, let's suppose that I am better than you. Even then, what do you think would happen to the price and quality? If we're the only ones selling shoes, chances are you're not going to get those shoes for very cheap or at very high quality. In fact, if I just plain don't like you, I have the power to deny this product to you entirely. But even if I were the nicest guy in the world and really wanted to sell you these shoes as cheaply as I could, how could I possibly tell if I were doing a good job? How could I tell without competition that my method of making shoes is efficient or if my shoes are really what the customers want? I could poll or test or guess, but no matter what I did, it will not be as effective as having the market tell me. These are all effective arguments against monopolies, all monopolies. In fact, if this needs further spelling out, even the state-held monopolies of legal and defense services are bad. Another famous guy who had a profound influence on political thought and pushed for the legitimacy of the state is John Locke. Locke is not as mean as Hobbes, and in fact believes that anarchy could possibly exist, but claims that governments, or at least the right kinds of governments within, are better overall. He has three main problems, he calls them inconveniences, with anarchy. There is no general body of law that is known and agreed upon. There is a lack of power to enforce these laws, and people cannot be trusted to be judges in their own case. Locke believes that governments automatically remedy these problems and effectively protect life, liberty, and property. And a lot of people, including some of you libertarians, believe this. Well, it turns out Locke could not be wronger if his name was Johnny McLong is Rock. Locke. A lot harder to say than it looks like. Not only would these things not occur under anarchy, at least anarchy laced with capitalism, but they happen very readily under governments. Law produced by governments is created at an unprecedented level. Try to wrap your head around the amount of laws on the federal, state, county, city, and local levels that the government passed just last year. Do you think you could rattle any of them off the top of your head? I mean, these are the newest, most pertinent, and certainly most well-known laws on the books. Does anyone want to try? Me neither. I doubt anyone could. And no one should, because the bulk of these laws are redundant or pointless. And your ignorance of the law is not held as a viable excuse for not following it. There are literally more laws than could possibly be upheld under the current government. This excess and waste is untenable under our private system. On the subject of uniformity, notice that all governments do not always uphold the laws of other governments. In fact, it was this lack of uniformity that made the creation of a law merchant necessary. Locke, like Hobbes, just somehow thinks that cooperation simply cannot exist outside of society, and thinks that all societies must, for some reason, contain a coercive state apparatus. But there is no reason to think that people cannot organize in a variety of ways without the state. One way people are prone to come together is to organize on a free market. Going back to our shoe example for a moment, if shoes are deemed necessary and of vital importance, this does not mean that the state should come in and create all shoes. The alternative to a state monopoly in shoes is not that everyone is their own shoesmith, but instead that under a free market there will be a division of labor, and in which it would be possible to trade for shoes. Now just replace the word shoe with law and shoesmith with police officer, and it is clear to see that the step toward market law is not an unreasonable one. At least not as unreasonable as creating a singularly powerful aggressor in the form of the state in the name of forcing people to cooperate. Locke's one point with which I wholeheartedly agree, people cannot be trusted to be judges in their own case, happens especially under government and not under anarchy. It is one thing to say that everybody involved in a dispute should submit their disputes to a third party, and it's quite another to say that there should be one particular third party to which everyone submits their disputes to. Think about it. Everybody may like one flavor of ice cream, but that does not mean that there's one flavor of ice cream everybody likes. So if Mo, Larry, and Curly have disputes with one another, you do not have to have Curly be the arbitrator of all three possible variations. You can have Mo arbitrate between Larry and Curly, you can have Larry arbitrate between Mo and Curly, and you can have Curly arbitrate between Mo and Larry. Imagine if Curly was always arbitrating and Mo would try to levy a charge against him. Needless to say, but Curly would not likely be impartial. Well, it's the same thing with a monopoly, state-run institution like we have now. What happens if you want to sue the Supreme Court? Or take the idea of a coercive police force to task? How exactly is one supposed to try the government when there is only one government who does the trying? This helps expose the myth of checks and balances in the American system of democracy. The executive, legislative, judicial branches are all part of the same government, and each of these institutions is a coercive monopoly in its own special area. Compare their pseudo-system of checks and balances with the real checks and balances provided by the free market. What keeps Payless Shoes honest is the competition, both actual and potential, from Foot Locker and countless other shoe stores. Knowing that customers could cut patronage would also keep free market courts and police on their toes, unlike now in which they are paid the same or even more for doing a job that they do only adequately. For instance, a free market police system would be based on preventing crime. That is, the highest paid cops would be the ones who stop the most crime. Whereas now, the areas with the most crime get paid the most money. Thus the current system provides a strong incentive not to prevent crime. Which finally brings us to our main course, private and legal defense services. It is an all too common fallacy, as Rothbard points out, that the government must supply police protection, as if police protection were a singular, absolute entity, a fixed quantity of something which the government supplies to all. But there is no actual protection commodity, any more than there is a single food or clothing commodity. There are multiple degrees of protection, from personal can of pepper spray to an ensemble of bodyguards that watch someone every minute of every day. The way people would determine how much of this security they want is by how much they're willing to pay for it, the same way they decide everything else in their lives. Because it's the individual's money, they will allocate it in a way that they believe is in their best interest and best serve their desired ends. The companies that pay for these services, more on these in a minute, would then have to do the exact same thing. Police services have many complicated and important decisions to make, from how much to invest in guns and ammunition. Oh, we have a shooting. I'll talk about shooting, social. I'll talk about that later. I should not have said that. How much to invest in guns and ammunition, and to whether new cars should be purchased or simply retrofitted. How much money should go towards funding new investments, and how much should be allocated into tried and true methods. What is the best way to run a police force, kind and courteous, or brusque and harsh? But if we remember what is said about all monopolies, no matter how well-intentioned, there is no possible way for them to know how or if they're doing a good job. There are no market forces guiding them. No market forces guiding them in the direction that the market wants. And the market, of course, is nothing less than the sum total of all voluntary human interaction. That is to say that there is no rational way that the government-sponsored police system can allocate its resources despite genuineness and even ingenuity. Rather than the funds for police services being determined by fulfilling the wishes of its customers, the state-run system is subject to the politics and bureaucratic inefficiency that by definition must come with a government-based monopolistic system. With a private police service, all these problems become entirely more manageable, because instead of being in the hands of a few bureaucrats who could very well,